What's going on, everybody? I'm Patrick from POWLAX, and in this video I'm going to be showing you how to read man down defenses within a 3-3 set. So when we're man up, we want to be as dangerous as possible, and the most popular man up set is our 3-3. Almost every single team that I watched either started and ended in a 3-3, or they just ended up in a 3-3 from some other set. Now, regardless of the play that each team likes to run, one of the things that can really help us is if we know which man down defense the other team is going to use. And so that's basically what we're going to talk about here. We're going to go through what kind of formation we want our 3-3 to be in, how we're going to swing the ball and then read the defense to know what type of man down defense they're in. Then we're going to talk about some special keys to how we want to attack each man down defense once we know exactly what it is. And so all of this is going to be talking only about the stationary 3-3 set, and this is going to be a video that I refer to in a lot of other man up videos, simply to give an explanation of each man down defense, how it works, and why the looks that I talk about are the ones that the players hit most when they see them in the game. But before we get started, make sure to check out patreon.com/POWLAX, where you can download and print the playbook PDF that accompanies this and over 50 other POWLAX videos by becoming a patron and supporting this channel. The goal for this channel is to put out free, in-depth lacrosse coaching content for coaches and players to access anytime, anywhere. So the first thing that we have to discuss is our formation, and I drew this formation with straight lines simply so that I could move the players after. So when we set up a 3-3, when we talk about a 3-3, we're talking about 3 players high, 3 players low, everybody above the goal, but we actually don't want our players to set up in this fashion. What we really want to have happen is we want to have our top 2 outside players move down a bit, and we want to have our bottom 2 players move down a bit. Now, what this is essentially going to do is it is going to create a skip lane from M3 to M1, from A1 to A3. Now, even though these 2 players are below GLE, as the ball swings away from them, they're going to come above GLE, and oftentimes as the ball hits them, they'll also come above, but even though they're not above GLE, they are still dangerous. The other skip pass that it helps us get is this M3 to A1 or M1 to A3 and back. And the reason is, even though it kind of looks like from M3 to A1 right now wouldn't work because A2 is in the way, as he starts to move and he, has good crease action, we are actually going to have those skip passes. So we definitely want our formation to be more like an umbrella 3-1-2 set rather than 3 straight, 3 straight. So now we're going to talk about how we're going to swing the ball, what we want our players to do, and which reads we want them to make so that we can easily distinguish exactly which man down defense the defense is in as little time as possible. So as we swing the ball, basically what we're going to do is the ball is going to get to low left or low right. I'm going to go with low right first because most players are righty, and hopefully that'll allow them to do it, but it works either way. So as A3 has the ball, he's going to move the ball up to M3, who will pass to M2, who will pass to M1, who will pass to A1. And within all of these passes, by the time the ball hits A1, we should know exactly which man down defense they are in based on how the defensive players played, which is what we're going to go over. So now as the players are swinging the ball, we don't want them to just throw the ball around the outside and not step in. We want them to be actively playing, and they should basically be looking for looks that are 80 to 90% efficient. If they don't find one, they shouldn't take it, because we're basically evaluating how we want to attack them based on what they're doing as we swing the ball this first time. But so as they're swinging the ball, they need to be stepping into gaps, moving the ball effectively, not letting anybody get into their hands, but making sure that the defense is actively playing them. If they don't really play it, the defense won't work the way it would usually work. They can kind of cheat certain things, and so we might not get the information that we need. So now that we know what we're going to do to cause the defense to move so that we can read them, now what are the reads? So we want to start with the idea that we know nothing about this team. If you can scout and you know what type of defense the other team usually uses, that's a really big key that you can use, and you can set up plays based on just that knowledge that will most likely work at least 50% of the time. But if you don't know anything, like say in the club circuit, and you really just want to have your players understand how to figure out what defense they're using and then do it, that's basically what we're doing here. So the first thing players need to be taught to do is just to listen. so oftentimes people will just yell out what they're in. They'll yell 5-man, 5-man, or 4-man, or box and one, or string, or house, or whatever it is. And I basically just went through the 5 most popular man down defenses to kind of give you that idea of, if they just tell you what they're in, now we can go right away. We don't even have to think about which defense they're in and therefore how we want to attack it. But so the first thing, they just got to listen. The next thing that they want to do is they want to watch the crease man. And so we're going to go over exactly how the crease will move and which man down defenses we're going to know based on his movement. And then we're going to have to clarify between 2 others as we go. The next thing we want to read is how many defensemen are covering the top 3 players. And essentially, in every man down defense except for one, the box and one, we are going to have 3 defensemen guarding up top. But in a box and one, they'll only have 2. So now let's talk about the actual reads as the ball swings from A3 all the way over to A1. The first one is, if DM1 comes up to play M2 as the ball hits M2 and then goes back in, we know that they are going to be in a box and string. Now, if DM1 ends up coming out to A1, we know that they are in a 5-man rotation. And if DM1 doesn't leave the crease, let's say he just stays on A1, now we know that they're in either a box and one or a 4-man rotation. Now, we haven't shown this house one yet, and the reason why is because it wouldn't start in this formation. So if they are in a house zone, DM1 is actually not going to be inside at all. He's actually going to be on the perimeter, and so let's say he is right up top. And now, instead of having a single solitary crease player who switches between 1 or 2, all 5 players are actually going to get in when the ball is backside. So as A3 has the ball, the LSM will be spidered in. He'll be playing the crease along with DM1. And then as the ball continues to move, each player on the backside will suck in to cover the crease. So now we've read the crease and we've eliminated basically every single man down defense except for 2. So now, if the crease player DM1 doesn't move off of the crease, we know they're in a box of 1 or a 4-man rotation. And the way that we're going to decipher between those is how many players are defending the top 3. And so if 3 players defend, we know it is a 4-man rotation. If 2 players defend, we know that it is a box and one. Those are just the quickest ways that we can figure out exactly which man down defense they're in. Now we're going to go through each one and talk about how we want to attack each one once we know what they're in. So before we actually get into exactly what each one looks like, I'm going to go over some tips for exactly how we want to attack certain things if you see them. So the first thing we have is 2 defensemen high, which we'll see is a part of the box and one. If they have only 2 defenders high defending these 3, we want to step into gaps and push the opposite sides of each one of these zones to try to force our 2-on-1s, our 3v2s. So essentially, if we pull both players to the middle with M2 and we move it to M3, now M3 and A3 are going to have a 2-on-1 with D2 here. So we want to step into gaps and move the ball, use give and goes, etc. But we can basically use our 3v2 up top to attack. Now, if they have 3 defensemen high at any point in time, that means that we are going to have a 3v2 on the backside when the ball is at M2. So we want to make sure these players are stepping into zones, trying to fill passing lanes. A lot of times we want A2 to come pretty high so that he draws D1 or D2 away from A1 or A3, and these players have to try and find skip lanes. We want our players to use misdirection, so whether that's a no look, a look off, any kind of fakes to move off ball defensemen, that's what we want to do to make sure those skips will work. But essentially, if they have 3 defensemen guarding our 3 players high, that leaves a 3v2 backside, so we want to push that 3v2 backside by skipping the ball through. So now against zones, what we want to do is we want to step into the gaps between the zones, try and draw players to the far side of their zone, and then attack the backside of that zone. So we just talked about having 3 high, so let's say that they're in the house zone. The best gaps that we want to try to attack are in the middle, because all 5 players have zones that they're spidering to the middle, so we can pull everybody inside and then attack the outside. Or what's more likely is we can pull them outside and then attack the inside. So in the house zone, A2 is very important. He's going to have to make sure he draws these players from the backside when the ball's up top, and then we can work on our skips through. or if the ball is down low, that he actually pulls these players to the low side so that we can skip them from low to high. But so essentially versus zones, we want to make sure that we are attacking gaps, whether they're ball side or backside. Most likely in a house zone, they're going to be backside, but if we're in a box and one, now we're going to want to attack these zones up top where, say, we draw D3 over when the ball's with M2, step into the gap between M3 and D2, move the ball, force them to rotate, and then basically play our 3v2s to 2v1s to 1v0s. If we are in a zone and the zone breaks, everybody's going to have to rotate. So we'll show that with the box and one becoming a 4-man. Essentially, if M2 steps in to draw D3, he passes to M3, who steps in here. D2 is going to have to rotate up, and if M3 can pass the ball to A3 and A3 is pinching, D1 is going to have to come over. So essentially, that's going to create your 4-man. Or if you are in a house zone and somehow they break you, you're going to have to rotate over. The final thing that we have is versus rotations, and essentially when players are all rotating and they know that they are filling in backside, whether it's a 4-man rotation or a 5-man rotation, we want to make sure that we are manipulating off-ball players with fakes and misdirection and skip passes, so that as the backside players are trying to figure out where they need to be next and rotate, if we look them off, so we we look at the player that they're supposed to go to next if the ball keeps moving the way it is, and then we throw it through to the other side without looking, that's going to screw up their rotation. It's going to give us a lot of very good looks. But so all of that misdirection to kind of attack off-ball players is going to be important in attacking rotations. The other thing that we can do is just move the ball faster than they can rotate. This is going to be huge for our 4-man rotation, because using 4 players instead of 5, using 4 players to cover 5 instead of 5 to cover 6 is going to mean that a couple players are going to have to account for more space than they usually would. So now we're going to quickly go through each man down defense and show you exactly why and how we are going to beat them once you kind of see what they're in with our static 3-3, which a lot of times you're going to have some play that may end up in a 3-3, but these same things are going to work. So as you rely on this, if you get a look out of a play, you should be able to kind of exacerbate it with what we're about to talk about. So first is your box and one. Essentially, your box and one is a 5 on a die zone. So D3's got a zone, the LSM's got a zone, DM1's got a zone, D1's got a zone, and D2 has a zone. And so once we figure out that the crease is staying there, and really once we figure out that as D3 moves to play M3 and then moves back up, right when that happens, I know they're in a box and one. And therefore, if these players know, they then know that what we want them to do is we want them to step into gaps when they get the ball. We want them to move the ball to the opposite sides of their zones, and we want them to attack the 3v2 up top and then attack the 2v1s on the sides. As we get into the video, it's important to know that all of these teams are going to run plays or some sort of motion prior to being in the 3-3 or while they're in the 3-3. So it's not always going to be just stationary. We're mainly going to talk about how you know exactly which strategy they're using. And then we're kind of going to show some elements of how the looks we talked about were used by these teams. So for our first example of a box and one, notice how the Robert Morris players only use 2 players to defend the top 3. That's probably the easiest way we know that Robert Morris is in a box and one. Now, High Point is going to run a 5-man wheel with these 5 players, then step into the gap between the 2 top zones, and this is going to break their zone, causing them to rotate. Now, the interesting thing about how Robert Morris rotated here is that they actually rotated in a 5-man versus a 4-man. Now, in this example with Georgetown versus Yale, we notice that once Georgetown realizes that only 2 defensive players are playing the 3 up top, they step into the gap between the top 2 zones, pass to one of the adjacent sides, force the defense to rotate. Now, Georgetown uses a bunch of extra motion after they force them to rotate, get a decent shot, but just the main idea is if there's 2 defenders high, we know they're in a box and one, we want to press into the gaps and use the 3v2 up top to attack their defense. Now, within this, one of the other rules within zones is If one player ever tries to play the passer and the catcher of one pass, you always want to pass it right back. So these give and goes will work very well. The next one is our box and string. And so as the ball is swinging from A3 through to A1, we're going to see DM1 come up. And then as the ball moves to M1, he is then going to come back down to A2. So now once the ball hits A1, everyone on the entire offense should know, okay, they're in a string. And so as the ball swings back, once the ball hits M2 and DM1 comes up, these players need to recognize that D2 is trying to play both of them. And therefore, A2 should probably come up as DM1 comes up and kind of just follow him upwards to try to draw D2 over. So essentially, we've got 3 players high, which means we're looking for skips, which means that these 3 low players are playing 3v2, and they need to recognize that they have a numbers advantage backside, and they need to find and fill skip lanes so that M2, M1, or M3 can try to skip the ball through to them. The other thing that we want them to try to do is as M1, M2, and M3 catch the ball, we want them to use fakes and no looks, things of that nature, to try to move off-ball defensemen. The one that works really well here is if M2 catches the ball, DM1 comes up, we want to try to catch DM1 as he comes back down. So if M2 moves the ball to M1, and now he starts coming back down, M1 looks off towards A1, but then passes back to M2. M2 can now step into this gap behind the LSM and behind DM1 and take a nice good shot down, especially if this is one of our good shooters. Same idea goes for any like twist or 4-man play is once the ball moves from top center against the string, we want to step into the gap behind him trying to get back to the crease. So within this clip, Notre Dame is going to run 2 wheels within their 3-3, and both wheels are going to put them back into a 3-3. The first wheel is a 4-man wheel on the left side. Then they're going to run a 2-man wheel. But what we want to make sure that we notice is how the crease player is playing. And what you're going to notice is that when the ball hits up top, he's going to move off the crease player and come up. And as he does that, the 2 low players are going to pinch in on the crease. Now, the reason why teams like to use this box and string versus a box and 1 is because it allows the 2 players in the top zones to press to their men. Now, it is a little bit dangerous because you do have a 3v2 backside, but most man-down defenses have that anyway. This is kind of just a hybrid of the 2. Notice how right after the ball leaves top center, the defenseman who was guarding the top center player goes right back into the crease. This would be a great time to pass right back to him as he steps in behind that player to get a nice shot off. And finally, Notre Dame gets a good shot off by skipping the ball from the M1 midi to the M3 midi. Now, within this skip pass, he easily could have passed it right to M2 up top, who also could have taken the shot. The key, though, is just understanding the dynamics of the man down so that we know how we want to attack it. So now as we get into the house zone, now what you're going to see is as the ball swings, we're going to have players who are helping on the crease. They're going to move out to play the ball as it swings, and the backside players are going to spider in as the ball moves all the way around. Once you see your house zone, now we want to make sure that we're stepping into gaps behind all of the players. So the first thing that we want to do is as the ball swings, we want A2 to fill the gap behind all of these players in their zones so that we draw backside defenders in further, and then we can skip it through to the other side. Now, so then as the LSM comes here, if D2 and D3 have to come all the way over as M1 gets the ball, we're then going to have a lot more space to step in for, say, this skip pass through or others. Basically, we want to draw the backside zones through to the other side so that skip passes through will work better. Now with that, those off-ball players who are on the perimeter, they're going to need to make sure that they're stepping into the skip lanes. The other thing we want to make sure that we're doing is that we're using, fakes and no looks and any kind of misdirection to try to mess with these off-ball defenders as well. In this clip, we're going to see Virginia switch from a 4-man with a locked-off player to a house zone, and we're going to see Yale running 4-man rotations with the top 4 players going back and forth. But the rotations are going to take us into and out of a 3-3, so it's not really going to mess with our reads. So as the play starts, notice how this defensive player is locking off the player for Yale. Once the ball goes to the other end, they're going to bail out of that. They do give up a pretty decent shot, but now we're going to see the house zone and our house zone reads. So as the ball swings, notice how the players who are on the backside all spider in to help the crease. Now, this looks different than the box and string because once the ball moves from the top center offensive player, he doesn't rush back in to get to the crease. He allows the backside players to play the crease. And this distinction essentially allows us to not pick on one player, which would be the string, from a defensive perspective. So now, as we're watching, notice how all the players are spidering in. Almost no one gets all the way to the crease. And here's where we see a great example of how, when we do see the house zone, we want the crease to come up and almost fill the spots behind the players who are playing the ball. Because if the backside players have to get all the way into him, it's going to leave the backside players open. And if the backside defenders don't come all the way in to play them, they will be open. Now as Yale runs their 4-man wheel back the other way, they get a great look into the crease. So now we're going to talk about the 4-man and the 5-man rotation. And as we do, we're going to go over the rules of rotations within both concepts just so that we can kind of get the idea. So within a rotation, we've got basically we are always recovering from a slide if you think about it in terms of actual defense. So essentially the player on ball, the player who would have slid, his only responsibility is ball. The player to the left is only responsible for the player to the left, and the player to the right is only responsible for the player to the right. That leaves these 2 extra players to play 3. Now, if there's one specific player on their team who is very dangerous, we may lock them off, and then we're going into a 4-man rotation against 5. Now, if there's nobody who's very dangerous and we want to make sure our slides are as efficient as possible, then we are going to go into a 5-man rotation because the distance between players will shrink because we're using 5 to cover 6 versus 4 to cover 5. Now, within this, the player on ball, his job is only to play the ball. Then left and right, their job is to cover their men and then be in skip lanes. And so that's going to become a huge thing as we look at their rotations, is we want to make sure that we're skipping the ball through because rotations, basically always, the backside's always going to be open in rotations. The key is that the defense needs to use good spacing backside to try to cover 3 with 2. So that's the basics for how the 4-man and 5-man rotation work. And now we're going to talk about how we want to attack it within our 3-3. So essentially, let's talk about the 4-man first. So within the 4-man, DM1, he is going to lock off A2 and he's just going to stay inside. So now we have these 4 covering 5. And the easiest way to see a 4-man is that D2 is going to have to come all the way across the crease to cover A1 as the ball swings. So to show you, A3 passes to M3, D3 moves out, moves to M2, the LSM moves up, D1 comes up to play M1, and then D2 has to come all the way over to A1. And so if we kind of run that back, when the ball's with M2, we've got the LSM as ball, D1 left, D3 right, and D2 will actually be suspended between these 2 backside. And so it's actually not a very good idea to run a 4-man against a 3-3 because players who understand to read the backside zones, you basically have a 2-on-1 where the defensive player is split between players that are, 10 to 15 yards apart. So it's very hard to cover. You really have to make sure that your players in skip lanes are very effective. So if we are in a 3-3 and they are running a 4-man, that's what we want to do. We want to skip the ball through. And the best way to do it is to draw someone out. So let's say M3 has the ball on our very first rotation. Ball goes from A3 to M3. If it moves from M2, for a split second, we're going to have a good skip through to A3 because D2 is thinking he has to get over to A1. So any no-look pass this way that he throws that way will definitely help to draw D2 over so that we can skip it to A3. The next thing with rotations, and especially the 4-man rotation, other than the skip passes, is that we can actually beat them by moving the ball faster than they can rotate. So if our players can swing the ball quick enough, it may take less time to actually move the ball from A3 to M3 to M2 to M1 to A1 before D2 can actually get all the way over. And as this all happens, we want to fill the wake behind the defenseman. So even as all of this happens, let's say A3 has it, moves it to M3, moves it to M2, moves it to M1, moves it to A1. If A3 fills the zone behind D2 as A1 catches it, D2's got to come all the way out. And now D3 would have to get all the way down to cover A3 in order to make that happen. So just simple ball movement can allow us to beat it. And finally, the little rule is that backside players at all times have to recognize if one player is playing two and make sure that they separate, fill skip lanes, and try to accept balls in those skip lanes. So in this clip of a four-man rotation, what you're going to see is Penn State is going to run the same four-man wheel that we watched Yale run earlier. Now, as they run this, we're going to see a couple things. First, the crease player is going to pass off the player leaving the crease and pick up the player entering the crease. So we know that the crease player is staying inside. So now we're either in a box and one or we're in a four-man rotation. Now we want to know if Hopkins is going to be playing our top three players with two or three. And now as the ball moves to top center, we see that both adjacent defenders look as if they're going to come out at their men, and we also see that the player by the goalie, he is split between these two. And that's what gives us our skip look through from M2 through to A3 for this play to work. So our reads, once again, are to the crease and then how many players are defending our top three. Now in this clip, we're basically going to see the exact same thing we saw last time, but it's going to be a bit shorter. So essentially, Penn did a few motions prior to getting to this point, but now they're in their 3-3 and they're ready to attack. And we are going to see very quickly how you can almost see rotations by just watching how the players play. So as the ball swings from back left to top left, and then to top center, we see that the defensive players are already rotating. They already are trying to get into their assignments. The player who is right is moving up because he thinks the ball is going to move quickly. And now we see where our misdirection can come in. The Penn player throws a nice fake, draws him out even further, and then skips the ball through to the low corner. Easy goal. Now in a five-man rotation, it's going to look relatively the same, except for now DM1 is going to be a part of our rotation. And so it may look a little weird as we draw it, but it'll make more sense as we go. So as A3 passes to M3, D3 is going to come out to play M3. The LSM is going to start rotating up because he's going to be in charge of M2. And now D1 is going to kind of come up because he's got to split M1 and A1 when the ball's with M3. Now as the ball moves again, we're going to move again. Ball will be with M2. D1 will come all the way up to M1. And now DM1, as he's playing the crease man, needs to stay ball side of A2. And as the ball hits M2, he's actually going to come and he's going to split A1 and A2. Now as the ball moves to M1, he's going to have to come out and defend A1, and then it'll move to A1. And as that happens, D2 has to come inside to split A2, and he will eventually play A2. And D3 needs to get down the backside to guard and split between A3 and M3.
So one way that we can kind of help visualize what the five-man rotation should look like versus the house zone is basically just imagining that A2 is actually at X. So if we move him to X, now we'll kind of see the idea of the rotation a little more, and we'll see why DM1 comes out to play A1 and D2 has to come inside to play A2. So if the players just swing the ball up and around, and we draw in all of the players' rotations. So D2 will play A3, D3 will play M3, the LSM will play M2, D1 will play M1, and then DM1 will have to come across to play A1. Then D2 will have to spider in to cover A2. Hopefully he'll be ball side if they are open to get down. But so visualizing it in this way will kind of help us understand how it works.
So now as the ball is with A1, we've got DM1 on ball. We've got D1 up here playing M1. We've got D2 inside playing A2. We've got the LSM splitting M2 and M3. And then we have D3 who has to get down the backside to cover A3 and split between M3 and A3. Now he has to get down the side because A3 is way more dangerous than M3. And we should have the LSM kind of in this skip lane. You know, this pass from A1 to M3 is not as probable. So now that we understand how the defense works, now we have to kind of figure out how we're going to beat it. Essentially, we're always going to have a 3v2 backside. So as the ball hits up top, our skips through are going to work, and therefore we need players who understand when one player is trying to play two, and we can skip the ball through. The other thing is we want to do quick ball movement and misdirection so that we can get those off-ball players to move the wrong way and then attack the opposite side. The bottom line is within our 3-3, we've got more dangerous players than they have defensemen, and that should help us to find the looks. But understanding which man-down defense they're in will help us figure out exactly how we want to attack their man-down defense. So in this clip of Loyola versus Duke, the first thing we want to watch is where does the crease defenseman go. So right now, the crease is being defended by this player here. Now, as we roll the tape, we see where he's going to go. And at this point, we realize that he is moving out to guard the low left offensive player, which means that they are in a 5-man rotation. And you can kind of tell by the way that they're moving that they're in a 5-man rotation, because the players on ball are moving almost all the way out to play the offensive players, which means they're probably not just trying to defend a zone. And because there's not just one player playing the crease, you know they're not in a 4-man rotation. So now that we know that they're in a 5-man rotation, now how are we going to attack this 5-man rotation? And the first rule we have with the rotations is that no matter what rotation they're in, we're always going to have a 3v2 or a 2v1 backside. This will be a 3v2 because it's a 5-man rotation. So as we roll the tape, the first look that Loyola finds is a feed inside when the ball is up top, because the two defensemen in this 3v2 are playing towards the players on the pipes rather than the player inside, and they get a decent look here by throwing it inside. Now, having just gotten a good look by hitting the player inside, that's going to draw the two lower players up and into the crease a little more. And as Pat Spencer up top catches the ball, he throws a great fake towards the left side of the field and then skips the ball through to Chase Scanlon on the low right pipe, who shoots and scores. This is an excellent use of misdirection and faking to move off-ball defenders so that players can catch a ball with a little bit more time and finish effectively. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video on how to read man-down defenses within a 3-3. I know that there was a lot of defensive emphasis within this, basically because if you don't know how the man-down defenses work, you can't really read and figure out which one that they're in. I also hope that I did a decent job explaining. I know I had all the passes there for a while. I hope that wasn't a total hindrance on understanding what it was. If you'd like to download the playbook PDF of this, where I explain it in depth there as well, you can get that at patreon.com/POWLAX by clicking this link up here in the corner. If you have any questions or comments for me, definitely make sure to leave them down in the comment section. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Have a good one, and I'll see you guys in the next video.